The morning Marcus left for his 7 o'clock client call, I was already at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, watching the steam curl up and disappear the way ordinary mornings do, when nothing about them feels ordinary yet. He set his phone face down on the granite before grabbing his jacket, which was something he never used to do. And I noticed it the way you notice a word that's been spelled wrong. Not with alarm, just with the quiet certainty that something is off. I didn't say anything. I handed him his travel mug and he kissed me on the cheek and walked out. And the door clicked shut behind him with the kind of finality that only makes sense in retrospect. I stood there for a moment, then picked up his phone. I want to be precise about what happened next because precision is the only thing I trust when everything else is tilting. The screen lit up before I even touched it. A message preview from a contact saved as a male name I didn't recognize. 4 words visible before the screen went dark again. 4 words that restructured 3 years of marriage in the time it takes to exhale. I am a market research analyst by training, which means I spend my professional life reading patterns in data that other people look at and see nothing. And what I saw in those 4 words was not a single moment of betrayal, but the confirmation of a pattern I had been refusing to name for longer than I wanted to admit. I set the phone back down exactly where Marcus had left it. Face down. Same angle. I finished my coffee standing at the counter, looking out at the Philadelphia skyline going gray and bright at the same time, the way it does on a clear, cold morning. By the end of that week, I had everything I needed. Marcus had no idea I had started looking, which was his first mistake, and it would not be his last. To understand what Marcus took from me, you have to understand what I actually built. Because he spent 3 years quietly rewriting that history, and I refused to let the revision stand. When we met, he was a brand strategist with a strong instinct for narrative and a significant gap in everything that sits underneath it. The research, the methodology, the empirical scaffolding that turns a pitch into something a room full of executives actually believes. I was the person who knew how to build that scaffolding. For 3 years, I built it for both of us without ever putting my name on it. The first time it mattered was his pitch to a national consumer goods company, the kind of client that would change the scale of his entire practice. The behavioral analysis section of his deck was thin in the way that experienced clients recognize immediately. I spent 2 weeks building a framework, running the segmentation, structuring the findings in language that was precise without being academic. He walked in with that deck and walked out with the contract. My name was nowhere in the document, and I told myself that was fine because we were building something together, and the line between his work and mine didn't need to be drawn inside a marriage. That was the logic I kept using. When he needed data to convince a difficult client that his strategy had empirical backing, I ran the analysis and sent him the results by late evening. When he started calling himself a data-informed strategist in new business meetings, I recognized the phrase because I had written it in an email coaching him on positioning months earlier. I noticed each time, I said nothing each time. I was still operating under the assumption that what was good for him was good for us, which is the kind of assumption that only holds as long as both people are making it. Jade Forrester did not appear from nowhere. She had been circling the edges of Marcus's professional world before I understood what I was looking at. A former intern turned account manager who knew exactly which questions to ask in which rooms to signal that she belonged there. She was not careless. She was patient in the specific way people are patient when they have already decided what they want and who they need to get it. What she wanted included Marcus. What Marcus could give her included access, frameworks, and a credibility she had not yet built on her own. I did not know the full shape of it yet, but the pattern was already in the data, waiting for someone willing to read it. The 4 days that followed were the strangest of my life, not because of what I was doing, but because of how ordinary everything looked from the outside while I was doing it. I went to work. I answered emails. I made dinner and sat across from Marcus at the table we had picked out together at a furniture store in Old City. And I listened to him talk about a new client pitch while something in the back of my mind was quietly, methodically pulling thread. The most important skill I discovered I had during those 4 days was not the ability to find information. It was the ability to not let anyone see that I was looking. What I had legal access to was enough. The shared calendar, the cloud storage we had set up together in the first year of our marriage, the joint financial accounts I managed, and the metadata buried inside documents Marcus had forwarded from his work email to a personal account I only knew existed because I had helped him set it up. Metadata does not perform for an audience. It simply records date created, date modified, last edited by, original file name. And what the metadata in one particular strategy document told me was that a proprietary research framework built inside my company's system had been opened, copied, and modified by someone other than Marcus before it became the backbone of a pitch deck with his name on the cover. That someone had a name, and that name was Jade Forrester. I called my mother that evening while Marcus was in the shower. Dorothy picked up on the second ring and I told her what I had found. Not all of it. Enough. She did not ask me how I was feeling. She did not tell me what to do. She asked if I had somewhere safe to keep the documents, and when I told her yes, she said, "Good. I'm here," and that was the conversation. 4 words from a woman who has spent 30 years knowing exactly which 4 words a situation requires. The next evening, I called Patricia Osei. A former colleague had given me her name 2 years earlier with the kind of quiet emphasis that means more than it says. And I had kept the number without examining why. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was still for a moment before she said, "Send me everything tonight. Don't confront him. Don't change anything about how you're moving." I sent the files before midnight. I slept 4.5 hours, which was more than I expected and exactly what I needed. Patricia Osei's office was not the kind of place designed to impress. It was a working room, files stacked in a precise order that only made sense to the person who built the system. A single window looking out at a block of Center City, Philadelphia that had seen better decades. And a tapped-out coffee cup she had clearly stopped noticing an hour before I arrived. She read through everything I had sent the night before without speaking, and when she looked up, her first sentence was not about my marriage. It was about the law. Using your company's proprietary research framework without written authorization is not just a divorce asset question. If we can establish that the framework was transferred to a third party for commercial use, we are looking at a trade violation claim that runs parallel to the family proceedings. She let that land, then said she needed an independent investigator to verify the document trail before we moved on anything. That was how Raymond Ashford entered the picture. Not as a dramatic reveal, but as the next logical step in a process that Patricia was already 3 moves ahead on. Raymond came recommended through Patricia's office. A licensed private investigator and former federal agent who specialized in the kind of financial and intellectual property fraud that looks like paperwork until someone who knows what they are reading explains what they are actually looking at. I never met him in person during those weeks. We communicated through Patricia, which was exactly how she wanted it. Clean. Documented. Nothing informal that could be challenged later. What Raymond found in the document trail confirmed what the metadata had already suggested, and then pushed further than I had anticipated, establishing not just that the framework had been accessed, but that Jade had used it in a pitch to a client that competed directly with one of my company's existing accounts. In the 2 weeks that followed, I continued to live inside the apartment with Marcus as though nothing had shifted. I cooked. I asked about his day. I listened to him describe a new campaign concept with the same attentive expression I had worn for 3 years, and he had no reason to read it differently because he had never considered that I was capable of running 2 realities at once. Gwen Ashby, my closest colleague and the only person inside my professional world who knew what was happening, kept a backup copy of every document on an encrypted drive at her home. We did not discuss it at the office. We did not text about it. Every morning she looked at me across the open floor and asked if I was okay, and I said yes. And that single exchange was the entire architecture of the support system we needed. Marcus never noticed. He was too busy being certain he was the most strategic person in our marriage. Marcus did not see it coming, because he had never considered that the meeting he walked into that morning was anything other than a routine client check-in. He had his slides pulled up on his laptop before he sat down, the same confidence radiating off him that I had watched him carry into every room for 3 years. The in-house counsel for the consumer goods company was already seated when he arrived, which should have been the first signal. But Marcus read the room the way people read rooms when they are certain they already know what the room is going to say. The lawyer set a document in front of him and asked him to explain why the analytical framework in his strategy proposal matched a proprietary research asset belonging to a Philadelphia market research firm at a rate that their forensic review had calculated at 94%. Marcus had no answer. There is no answer for that question that survives contact with Raymond Ashford's documentation. Jade found out before Marcus did, which was not an accident. Patricia had timed the outreach to her agency to land the same morning, and the internal email Raymond had recovered, the one where Jade described to a colleague how she had accessed the framework and noted they didn't need to worry because the source was inside the household. That email was attached to Patricia's correspondence to the agency's legal department, with no editorial commentary. Just the document and a request for a formal response. Jade was suspended by early afternoon. Not because her agency had a particular commitment to doing the right thing, but because they had an acute commitment to not being named in a trade violation filing alongside her. I was not in either of those rooms when any of it happened. I was sitting at a small coffee shop in Center City with a glass of water and a book I was not reading, waiting for my phone to ring. When Patricia called, she said 2 words. "It's done." I closed the book, finished the water, and called my mother. Marcus called 6 times over the next 2 hours. On the 7th call, I picked up. His voice was controlled in the way that people control their voices when panic is directly underneath. And he said, "Serena, we need to talk." I said, "I know. My attorney will be in touch." Then I ended the call. That was the last conversation we had without Patricia in the room. The consequences came the way consequences always come when the foundation has already been removed, not all at once, but in a sequence that feels inevitable once you understand the structure underneath. The first client firm terminated its contract with Marcus within 10 days of that meeting, citing a material breach of the representations he had made during onboarding regarding the originality of his analytical work. The second did not renew when its agreement came due. No formal statement, just a silence that communicated everything. The third did not wait for its contract to expire because their legal team had questions about 2 additional years of deliverables that Marcus could not answer any better than he had answered the first question in that conference room. The professional association Marcus had been a member of for 6 years received a formal ethics complaint filed through Patricia's office, accompanied by a summary of Raymond Ashford's findings and the relevant documentation. The review process took 8 months, which is the kind of timeline that feels slow until you understand that the outcome, a 2-year suspension of membership, effectively removed his name from every verified consultant directory that the companies he needed used when they were looking for someone to hire. He did not disappear. He just became someone those rooms stopped calling. Jade Forrester left Philadelphia. Not because anyone legally compelled her to go, but because the internal email Raymond had surfaced had made its way through enough conversations in the media and marketing industry that the city had become professionally small for her, in a way that a fresh start somewhere else was the surmise, more efficient calculation. She left with a revised resume and whatever story she had decided to tell about what had happened. The industry has a longer memory than people account for when they are making decisions they assume will stay contained. The divorce proceedings in Pennsylvania took 11 months. Patricia built the case around the quantifiable value of my intellectual contributions across 3 years of marriage. The frameworks, the research, the methodology that had become the backbone of Marcus's most profitable client relationships. And she presented it with the same precision that Raymond had brought to the document trail. The settlement reflected what I had actually put into that marriage. not the diminished version Marcus had been constructing in his own account of things. I did not use the outcome to purchase anything that needed to announce itself. I used it to close the distance between what I had contributed and what had ever been acknowledged. That distance had been the real cost all along. I did not leave Philadelphia. That city was mine before it was ours, and I was not willing to hand it over along with everything else. I found an apartment in a neighborhood I had always wanted to live in but never chosen because Marcus preferred a different part of town, and I signed the lease with the same steadiness I had used to send Patricia those first files. No ceremony, just a decision made clearly and followed through. I got a cat named Bernard who has no awareness of my legal history and relates to my presence in the apartment almost entirely through the lens of his feeding schedule, which was exactly the dynamic I needed. Gwen Ashby came over the first weekend and we sat on the floor because I had not yet bought enough furniture and talked until it was late in the way that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for a season. Dorothy called every Sunday evening without being asked. Not to check on me in the way that implies fragility, but in the way that simply means I am here, which is its own language between a mother and a daughter who already know what the other is made of. Patricia sent a short email 6 months after the divorce finalized. "How are you doing?" I wrote back, "Better than that question has room for," and she replied with one word, "Good." That exchange carried more than most longer conversations do. Raymond Ashford I never met in person across the entire process, and yet his work was the load-bearing wall inside everything Patricia built. Sometimes the most consequential person in your story is the one no one in the room ever sees. And that detail, the fact that Raymond's name never appeared anywhere Marcus could find it until it was too late to matter, was not an accident. It was architecture. I returned to the research project I had proposed before my marriage began to come apart. The one I had set aside because there was always something of Marcus's requiring my attention first. This time my name was first on the author list. Not because I argued for it, but because it was accurate. And accuracy had become the thing I was least willing to compromise. The work was good. It had always been good. It just finally carried the right name. The morning after the divorce papers were signed, I stood at the window of the apartment that was entirely mine and watched the Philadelphia light come in low and unhurried from the east. Bernard wound around my ankles with the complete self-assurance of a creature who has never once doubted his place in the world. What I felt was not triumph in any dramatic sense, but something quieter and more durable. The feeling of a person standing in a life that finally fits the truth of who she actually is. If you stayed with this story all the way through, thank you. There is a part of me living inside it. Not every detail, but the feeling of standing back up after someone tried to write you out of your own life. I hope you find your version of that window, that morning, that light coming in, and I hope when you do, it feels exactly like yours.